Part 1. The thirst of the trail west was not a place built for comfort. It was a land of dust, wind, and endless horizons that mocked every rider who thought he could conquer it. Of all the enemies a cowboy faced, storms, stampedes, sickness, even bullets, thirst was the most patient. And on the trail, thirst never hurried. It simply waited, knowing every man would meet it sooner or later. Cattle drives stretched across hundreds of miles of plains. The work was long, hot, and relentless. The sun didn't just shine, it hammered. The dust didn't just cling, it choked. Every mile rode into a cowboy's throat like sandpaper. They had canteens, yes, but water vanished faster than they could refill it. A man might ration carefully, sipping from his tin cup at dawn and again at dusk, but under the cruel sun those sips felt like drops against a fire. Cowboys joked that food was optional, but water was law. Beans and biscuits could keep for weeks, jerky for months, but thirst came daily. And when the herd bawled for water, the men felt the same gnawing inside their throats. Horses stumbled sooner than men did, and once horses faltered, cowboys knew their own turn was close. The worst part wasn't the dryness, though the cracked lips, swollen tongues, and burning throats were misery enough. The worst part was seeing water and not daring to touch it. The prairie held rivers, streams, ponds, and muddy holes that looked like salvation from a distance. But every cowboy knew that drinking from the wrong source could mean sickness worse than thirst itself, fever, cramps, weakness that stole your strength faster than the sun ever could. To drink without thinking was to gamble your life. So they rode past water. Imagine it, a herd bawling at the smell of a river, horses tugging at reins, cowboys' lips split and bleeding, and still they held back. The boss made the call. If the water was foul, if carcasses floated, if the banks were lined with slime and insects, he turned the herd aside. Better to risk another mile of thirst than to poison the entire outfit in one careless gulp. But discipline didn't erase the torment. Cowboys stared at the shimmer of streams, their hands twitching toward canteens already dry. Greenhorns sometimes broke, sliding from the saddle to drink their fill. The veterans didn't stop them. Why bother? By morning, the lesson would teach itself. Those who survived the sickness swore they'd never touch untested water again. Those who didn't, well, the trail didn't pause long enough for eulogies. Every cowboy carried his own story of thirst. The times when lips swelled until whistling a song was impossible. The nights when dreams were filled not with women or gold, but with cold, clear water trickling from a mountain spring. Men woke coughing, mouths dry as ash, reaching for canteens they knew were empty. It was the quiet torture of the trail, not dramatic, not loud, but constant. The irony was thick as the dust they swallowed. The land was full of rivers, streams, and ponds, and yet men died with their canteens rattling empty. Water was everywhere, and at the same time, nowhere at all. The West laughed hardest through thirst, and cowboys paid the price one dry mile at a time. That was the start of it, a land where thirst rode shotgun, with every man and every river carried more threat than promise. Part 2. Surrounded by water. None to drink, nothing mocked a cowboy more than the sight of a river, a glittering ribbon cutting through the prairie, promising relief from the dust, and yet, more often than not, it was a death trap disguised as salvation. Cowboys called it liquid gambling. You could drink and quench your thirst, or drink and spend the next week curled up, too weak to ride. Some men didn't live long enough to regret the choice. The problem wasn't just dirt. Prairie rivers carried everything upstream: mud, animal waste, rotting carcasses, and sometimes worse, cattle drowned during crossings, their bloated bodies snagging on branches downstream. Buffalo herds stirred up silt until the water ran brown. Coyotes and wolves drank freely, carrying sickness from one bend to another. Every gulp from a river was a roll of dice with too many losing sides. Cowboys learned quickly to test the water. If it stank, they held back. If flies buzzed thick over the surface, they moved on. If they saw a carcass bobbing, they spat in disgust and forced their parched throats to endure. But even the clearest stream wasn't safe. Microscopic killers, though they didn't have that word back, then turned fresh-looking water into poison. Cowboys only knew it as bad water. Drink it, and within hours your body betrayed you. The irony burned. A herd might be driven. For days, bawling and stamping, desperate for water, only to be turned away from a wide, shining river because the boss had spotted the signs. Men sat on horseback, tongues swollen, staring at salvation they couldn't touch. More than one cowboy swore that was the truest cruelty of the West, dying of thirst with water right there, close enough to hear. Desperation made fools of men. Greenhorns dipped canteens when no one was looking. The veterans didn't bother to stop them. A night of sickness would cure the lesson deeper than words. Some survived, weaker but wiser. Others dropped from the saddle, fever burning them, hotter than the sun ever could. Cowboys learned quickly that thirst might kill slowly, but bad water killed faster. Crossings were the worst. To drive a herd across meant splashing through rivers thick with mud, sweat, and fear. Horses stumbled, cattle drowned, men swallowed mouthfuls they hadn't meant to. Even unwilling gulps carried a price. Cowboys often joked that every river crossing took a year off your life, not from drowning, but from whatever you swallowed along the way. Water holes were no better. A shallow pool looked harmless until you realized it was shared by every creature on the prairie. Antelope, buffalo, coyotes, even skunks, all drinking, bathing, fouling. By the time the herd arrived, it was less a pond and more a stew of disease. Yet sometimes there was no choice. A cowboy would dip his cup, mutter a prayer, and drink, hoping the dice favored him that day. The West was full of rivers, lakes, and streams, but cowboys knew most of them couldn't be trusted. The cruelest lesson the land taught was that thirst wasn't solved by water. Not that water. Not here. Out on the trail, men could drown surrounded by rivers, or die of thirst while staring at them. And so they rode on, lips cracked, canteens empty, the sound of running water mocking them at every bend. Part 3. Desperate measures. Cowboys weren't fools. They knew water could betray them as easily as bullets or broncs. But thirst was stronger than wisdom, and when lips cracked and tongues swelled, men grew creative or desperate. Out on the trail, every cowboy had a trick for beating bad water, though most of those tricks were little more than superstition dressed up as survival. The first method was boiling. If there was firewood and time, two luxuries the trail rarely allowed, they'd set a pot on the flames and let the water bubble. Cowboys swore by it, even though they didn't know why it worked. Some muttered that the evil boiled out. Others said it just made the water taste worse. Either way, boiling took patience, and patience was rare when the herd bawled and the sun cooked men alive. More often than not, cowboys drank before the water ever reached a rolling boil. Then came filtering, a bandana, a piece of shirt, even a sock. Cowboys poured river water through anything they had. It caught twigs, mud, and the occasional insect, but the real danger slipped through untouched. Still, filtered water looked cleaner, and sometimes that was all the courage a man needed to drink. Cowboys laughed that a dirty sock might save your life, though it just as often didn't. Mixing was another favorite. If you couldn't trust the water, drown it in whiskey or coffee. Whiskey numbed the taste and the fear. Coffee boiled long enough to feel safe. Cowboys poured river water into the pot, heaped in grounds, and hoped the bitter brew hid more than just the flavor. The joke was that trail coffee was strong enough to kill anything inside it, including the cowboy himself. Nobody argued when it was the only option. Some carried folk remedies, a pinch of salt tossed into a cup, a handful of charcoal scraped from last night's fire, a strip of leather boiled alongside the water. None of it worked, but it gave men the illusion of control. Out on the frontier, belief was as valuable as truth. If you thought the trick might keep you alive, you swallowed more easily, and when all else failed, cowboys simply drank and prayed. They weighed the agony of thirst against the risk of sickness, and chose whichever seemed less likely to kill them that hour. Many times, thirst won. Other times, the water did. Either way, the trail kept moving, and the herd didn't care which choice a cowboy made. Desperation also bred barter. A man with a full canteen could demand almost anything from those whose mouths were dry. A blanket, a knife, even a month's wages might be traded for a few gulps. Water became more valuable than gold. Cowboys joked that you couldn't drink coins, though more than one thirsty rider would have tried if he thought it might help. By the end of a drive, the tricks blurred together, boiled, filtered, mixed, prayed over. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. Cowboys never forgot the irony that all their ingenuity still left them staring at rivers, wondering if the next cup would be salvation or slow poison. Desperate measures kept men alive, but only just. The truth was brutal. The West didn't care how clever you were. It only cared how long you could hold out before thirst claimed its due. Part 4. Death in the Land of Plenty. The cruelest joke the West ever told was this: a man could die of thirst while his horse stood knee-deep in water. Cowboys saw it more times than they cared to count. A river wide as the sky, running strong and clear, and yet the riders passed dry-lipped. Canteens rattling empty, because to drink meant risking death just the same. It was a paradox every cowboy carried. You needed water to live, but the wrong. Water could end you faster than thirst itself. And so, when men finally fell from the saddle, it was often with rivers shimmering in the distance or pools gleaming just a mile away. A body slumped in the dust with swollen lips became another silent monument to the West's indifference. Cowboys told stories of men who broke discipline at the last moment. They threw themselves from the saddle, plunged face first into a river, and drank like cattle. Hours later, they were weaker than before, their bodies rebelling against the very thing they craved. Some staggered on for a day, others never rose. Again, around the fire, the lesson was repeated in whispers: better to die dry than drink bad water. But the truth was, most cowboys didn't have a choice. Thirst stripped men of reason. It hollowed them out, turned their thoughts into nothing but a single word: water. The West didn't need bullets or bandits to kill you. All it needed was a hot sun, a few empty canteens, and rivers to fall to trust. The irony grew heavier with every mile. The plains were cut with creeks, rivers, ponds, and springs. Yet every one carried suspicion. Cowboys became experts in disappointment. They'd ride half a day chasing the shimmer of water, only to find a stagnant pool thick with insects or a river with a carcass lodged upstream. The land mocked them with abundance that meant nothing. Even when graves were dug along the trail, they were often beside rivers, fresh earth and flowing water, side by side. Travelers passing later shook their heads at the sight. A man buried within arm's reach of what he needed most. Cowboys themselves grew numb to it. They knew that if the river couldn't be trusted, then it might as well not exist. In time, the image of dying of thirst beside water became part of Western lore. Dime novels twisted it into melodrama, but cowboys knew the plain truth. It wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. Ordinary in the same way as broken bones, snake bites, and fevers. Death was always close, and thirst was its quietest ally. The West didn't deal in fairness. It dealt in irony. And the greatest irony of all was that men could cross a continent filled with rivers and still die parched. Their canteens stayed empty, their throats stayed cracked, and the water they needed most flowed past untouched. So when you think of cowboys riding under that endless sky, picture this: not just the dust and the heat, but the sight of men staring at rivers they dared not drink. Picture the cruel joke of dying in a land of plenty. That was the West's final word on thirst. Not mercy, not kindness, only irony.